So I did focus a bit on my gymnastics work and just trying to improve my overall mobility as well as strength. With a year to go, yeah, it's just about getting better every single day. I focus on the small stuff. Ultimately, that'll add up and put me in the best position come next year.
Now, British paddlers have won Olympic medals at every Games dating back all the way to Sydney 2000, but you'd have to go to Athens 2004 for the last female success. That's an unwanted run that Mallory Franklin certainly wants to end at next year's Games.
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool to stand on the podium, but I think the Games are such a weird event, especially in slalom, because it can change in a split second on the run. But I mean, yeah, it's definitely an aspiration of mine, and I'm just going to keep trying to get more and more consistent with my paddling, so hopefully that becomes true.
With no international events currently scheduled for this year, the squad will have to make do with internal competitions, but there is certainly strength in depth here in Great Britain, and the squad feel that they can challenge for multiple honours come the revised Tokyo Olympics in 2021.
Nick Hope reporting there. That is all from us here on Sports Day. A reminder, you can check out the BBC Sport website, where three-time world champion Mark Selby is about to get underway in the World Snooker Championship, and Ross County take on Motherwell later on in the Scottish Premiership in the football. You can get the latest on that on the BBC Sport website too. But we'll have more for you throughout the evening. Thanks so much for watching. We will see you again a little bit later on.
Hello there. Tuesday looks likely to see a north-south divide with the weather story, so let's take a look at what's heading in our direction. As an area of low pressure is going to push in from the Atlantic, it's going to bring some heavy rain for a time and strong winds to the southern flank of that low across the far north. It means the best of the sunshine will be across central and southern areas, clouding over a rather drab, drizzly, dreary end to the day the further south and west you are, but the rain heaviest across southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some significant bursts here and gusts of winds in excess of 40 miles an hour. So not feeling particularly great under the cloud and rain, 15 to 17 degrees. Perhaps we'll see 23 in the southeast with the sunshine. That weather front takes its time to clear away, a weakening affair on Wednesday, but it will continue to drive in more in the way of cloud, showery outbreaks of rain, but the wind direction turns round to more of a southwesterly. So eventually we're going to see some sunnier and increasingly warmer weather in the south.
This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. Tributes to John Hume, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who helped to end the Troubles in Northern Ireland. He's died at the age of 83.
I have to say on this sad day that we wouldn't have the peace that we enjoy today if it wasn't for John Hume.
His contribution to peace in Northern Ireland was extraordinary. I don't think we would ever have really got the peace process going and implemented.
Spain's former king Juan Carlos decides to leave the country following allegations of corruption against him. New 90-minute tests for coronavirus and flu are to be rolled out next week in hospitals in England. In Italy, Genoa's new bridge is officially reopened, replacing the one that collapsed 2 years ago. And eat out to help out. From today, diners in the UK can get a discount of up to £10 each to boost the struggling hospitality sector. Hello and welcome to BBC News. A political giant, a champion of peace, and one of Ireland's greatest ever sons. Leading figures from around the world have been paying tribute to the Nobel Peace Prize winner and Northern Ireland politician John Hume, who's died. He was 83. He was key to ending decades of violence in Northern Ireland, which killed thousands of people. Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister when the Good Friday Peace Agreement was signed in 1998, described him as a visionary who refused to believe that the future had to be the same as the past. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy looks back at his remarkable life.
A visionary by the injustice of discrimination against Catholic communities in the 1960s, he became a leading campaigner for housing and employment rights. As a Catholic who refused to support the IRA, after the Troubles broke out, John Hume founded the Social Democratic and Labour Party. His objective was to achieve a united Ireland, but only through consent.
And the SDLP have failed to do that.
Sorry, well, that's a very fundamental point.
At great personal risk. In the 1980s, he entered into secret talks with Gerry Adams, the leader of Sinn Féin, the political voice of the IRA. It provoked anger and criticism, but he refused to change course.
I don't give two balls of roasted snow, Jim, what advice anybody gives me about those talks, because I will continue with them until they reach what I hope will be a positive conclusion.
His stubborn efforts helped bring about the IRA ceasefire and brought Sinn Féin into the talks that led to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, ending the conflict.
Today we can take a collective breath and begin to blow away, let's hope, the cobwebs of the past.
He and I had many disagreements, and that's a very, very healthy thing to do and to have. But when we were able to talk and to actively promote the primacy of politics, of dialogue, of inclusivity, and so on, which then led to the Hume-Adams talks, I have to say on this sad day that we wouldn't have the peace that we enjoy today if it wasn't for John Hume.
The peace deal was a turning point for Northern Ireland and saw John Hume hailed as a hero by pop stars and presidents.
Mr. President and Mrs. Clinton, as you can see from the people of Derry, you're very, very welcome here today.
Today, former US President Bill Clinton said John Hume always kept marching on against all odds towards a brighter future for Northern Ireland. After he was awarded the Nobel Prize, Mr. Hume gradually stepped down from his public roles, but was always greeted with admiration and affection in his hometown of Derry.
John Hume genuinely was a political titan. I mean, his contribution to peace in Northern Ireland was extraordinary. I don't think we would ever have really got the peace process going and implemented if he hadn't been there offering help and advice.
John Hume's commitment to ending violence helped make Northern Ireland a better place for future generations. He was the architect of the peace process, and his death a reminder of how far Northern Ireland has come.
Earlier, our former Ireland correspondent Dennis Murray, who reported for the BBC during the Troubles and the Good Friday peace talks, gave us his thoughts on John Hume's legacy.
The legacy, I think, is, as Tony Blair said, he was a titan. He was unusual in politics, in my experience, in that he was a very deep thinker, he was a political intellectual, but he could also brawl it out in debates. I remember once moderating a debate between him and the late Ian Paisley, who's famous for his never, never, never speech and always saying no. And at one point, John Hume leaned across me and he pointed at Ian Paisley and he said, if the word no was taken out of the English language, you'd be speechless. So I never saw him bested in debate by anybody, including hecklers. But he not only was the custodian of the peace process, he was the inventor of it. His real contribution was this: until he did it, and nobody since has bettered it, he actually defined what the Northern Ireland problem was, which up to then, everyone had a different view of what the problem was. To Unionists, it was how to maintain the Union. To Republicans, it was how to break the Union. And he came up with this definition, which was, it's about relationships with people between the two communities in Northern Ireland, between Belfast and London, and between London and Dublin. And that has lasted to this day. Up to that, London and Dublin were shouting at each other. And I've just heard President Mary McAleese compare John Hume to Daniel O'Connell. I think John Hume has a greater stature than Daniel O'Connell or Parnell because his career was successful. He achieved what he set out to.
Stay with us, because in half an hour's time we'll be speaking to Peter Taylor, the journalist and documentary maker known for his coverage of the Troubles. He first met John Hume in the early 1970s. The former King of Spain, Juan Carlos, has said that he has decided to leave the country, weeks after he was linked to an investigation into alleged corruption. Juan Carlos made the announcement in a letter to his son, King Felipe, to whom he handed power 6 years ago. It's not clear where Juan Carlos will reside. The letter makes it clear that he would remain available should prosecutors need to interview him. In June, Spain's Supreme Court opened an investigation into the alleged involvement of Juan Carlos into a high-speed rail contract in Saudi Arabia. The former king, who is 82, has repeatedly declined to comment on the allegations against him. Well, let's go live to our correspondent, Nick Beake, who's in Brussels. Nick, there is a letter the former king wrote. Does he say where he's going?
James, he doesn't, and it's interesting trying to interpret this. It is, on the face of it, a letter from a father to a son making clear that the allegations at a time when he, of course, was the king himself, Juan Carlos, are detracting from the current institution and the way they're trying to rebuild and salvage reputation. He makes it clear that the allegations against him are very public and they're damaging, and he says the best thing is for him to go to somewhere else, to leave the country, so that his son is able to govern, to reign in a way that he describes as being tranquil. So that is his intention, that's his hope. Whether or not, of course, that is the case, we shall see.
Where does this leave the legal investigations against him?
Well, you'd imagine, even though he's leaving the country, the various investigations will continue. And remember, they're on two fronts. Both nations said that this money had been received as a result of this contract involving Saudi Arabia, that cash had come from the late Saudi king. But also, you've got the Swiss financial authorities there, of course, well versed in looking into quite detailed, prolonged investigations. You'd think that both that continues as well. And interestingly, there has been a statement from the royal household tonight saying that, yes, it wants to underscore the role that King Juan Carlos played, but also how democracy and the rule of law and making sure justice prevails, they're also important qualities that Spain wants to uphold now and in the future.
Nick Beake, thanks so much. Two different tests which can detect coronavirus and flu within 90 minutes are to be rolled out in hospitals in England from next week. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says that they will be hugely beneficial over the winter. At the moment, a third of tests take longer than 24 hours to process. The labs, which have devised the new tests, claim that they are more reliable than current swab tests with almost 100% accuracy. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has more.
Get your head up, facing back. Katie, a hospital pharmacist, is being tested for COVID-19 and she'll only have to wait 90 minutes for the result. It just needs one nasal swab, then this machine detects whether there's any genetic material from the virus. It can reject the sample if it hasn't been gathered properly. They've been trying it out at this London hospital and it's made a big difference to how they manage patients coming in for treatment.
Previously, we were having to wait 24 hours or longer to get our swab results back. And this meant that we were needing to use lots of side rooms to isolate patients. And this means that we can actually cohort the right patients in the right places really rapidly.
At a high-tech factory near Oxford, another rapid testing system for COVID-19 is being produced, initially for use in hospitals, but in due course available for care homes and other health locations. What's more, it will in time be capable of detecting flu viruses as well, an important asset in winter.
When you add those two together, it will result in people wanting to test more. And the more we test, the more people get confident, the more people will test. And it's a self-fulfilling upward spiral.
These two British innovations, along with others in development aiming to produce fast test results, have been praised by the World Health Organization.
it is really, again, incredible the amount of tests that are being developed and the fact that we have rapid tests that are being developed. This is a positive thing, and this will help control efforts.
Some experts, though, have called for more detail on the performance of the different testing systems.
It's really important that we get good data to understand are there compromises in accuracy with having a higher speed test.
At this stage, these technologies will be focused on hospitals and the testing of patients and staff. But the big question is, can they, with others, be extended to help with the mass community testing in different settings, which is seen as vital if the virus is to be kept in check?
Some social care organisations have complained of problems getting any virus tests. This care home looks after adults with learning disabilities and has had no supplies of kits for 9 weeks. So there's a little scepticism about the latest announcement.
And I worry that actually, is there going to be enough tests to roll this out across the whole of social care for staff and residents? And yeah, I think we've been told so many things that are then U-turned on, that whether this is actually going to materialise into something or not.
I need to take a sample from the back of your throat.
Walk-in and drive-through testing sites have expanded rapidly, an important source of data for controlling local outbreaks, though the results take 24 hours to come back from labs. Rapid results from kits on site would be a big step forward. The new systems represent just a start. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The Italian city of Genoa has inaugurated its new bridge, almost 2 years since 43 people were killed when the previous bridge collapsed. The new structure was designed by the renowned Italian architect Renzo Piano, who's from the city of Genoa. I've been speaking to our Italy correspondent Mark Lowen, who's there.
It's taken just over a year to build a bridge in a country where infrastructure projects are notoriously slow. This is a very, very beautiful new structure, a sleek steel and concrete construction that sweeps across the valley, designed, as you say, by Renzo Piano, the international well-renowned architect, known for example, the Shard in London, the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the New York Times headquarters building. And they have absolutely worked at breakneck speed to get this up in time. They worked through the coronavirus outbreak, which really floored Italy. And it is now being inaugurated. The President and Prime Minister of Italy are here. The President has met the relatives of the 43 victims of the collapse of the old bridge, which, of course, you will remember well, James. You were the Italy correspondent covering this story at the time in 2018, a tragic collapse of the old Morandi Bridge, which, when one of its concrete cable stays broke apart and a 210-metre long section of the bridge fell to the ground. It was one of the worst infrastructure disasters in modern history, and I have to say that the families of the victims are boycotting the ceremony. Many of them say that they are simply too anguished to come here today, but they have met privately with the President of Italy, and he has said in the ceremony that the wound does not heal and the pain only gets less.
And Mark, you had a chat with Renzo Piano himself.
Yes, indeed. I spoke to him on the eve of the inauguration of the bridge, and he said he feels a mixture, really, of emotions as he looks up at this very beautiful structure, which he says he thinks will become known as La Nave, the ship. It echoes a ship sweeping across this port city. He said he feels pride, he feels satisfaction that it has been built so quickly, but he also feels deep sadness as well, of course, that this was born of tragedy. He said he remembered growing up here in Genoa. He is Genoese himself, and he said he used to drive across the old Morandi Bridge. It was an icon of the city, and he said everybody loved the bridge. It was a beautiful bridge, but everybody was also rather frightened by the bridge, by the fragility of the bridge. Even soon after its inauguration in 1967, the steel inside the concrete began to corrode. The company which was in charge of maintaining it, called Autostrade per l'Italia, stands accused of ignoring and neglecting repeated warnings of the corrosion of the steel and the concrete, not retrofitting the bridge sufficiently. So many of its employees and many civil servants are now being investigated, 71 of them, in a preliminary investigation into the cause of that disaster, and a trial is expected to start next year on charges including multiple manslaughter.
Mark Lowen in Genoa. Employers here in the UK can now insist that staff return to the workplace following a change in government advice to work from home where possible. But companies need to make sure that sufficient safety measures are in place. The government hopes that the return of employees will boost local economies. But how many will actually venture back to their offices. Our business correspondent Sarah Corker reports from Leeds.
You can't build a jukebox from home. At Sound Leisure in Leeds, while the manufacturing team have been back for months, today saw the phased return of half of the firm's designers and back office staff. Brand manager Joe hasn't missed the hour-and-a-half commute to work.
I have to see how this week goes, you know, how productive I am. I've got lots of things to do, and there's a lot of things that I am already thinking, if I was at home, I'd have got this done by now.
Morning, Chris. Across England, going to the office is likely to mean temperature checks, visors in some workplaces, hand sanitising stations, and expect one-way systems.
To the left-hand side.
Going forward, the boss here told me there'll be much more flexible working.
It has changed working patterns forever because people have realised that they can actually work from home, they can have a better work-life balance.
So perhaps a hybrid model then going forward?
Yeah, definitely we'll operate hybrid because, as I say, if it makes people happier and it makes the work environment safer, why wouldn't we?
In the workshop, Diane's been back since May and says the workplace in the era of COVID-19 does take some getting used to.
People were really scared. I mean, the distance 2 metres, people were like the other end of the shop trying to shout at you because nobody wanted to get near each other. As things moved on, more people came back to work, it got easier.
The government wants workers back at their desks because empty offices are starving shops and restaurants of customers. The BBC contacted some of the biggest employers in England, and most of them said they're not planning to bring the majority of their staff back to the office until the end of the year. And while our city centres are starting to get slightly busier, here in Leeds, footfall for July was still down 40%. Property consultants JLL say it won't be easy for everyone.
We accept that there are challenges for certain people, whether they're shielding a relative or whether they've got childcare issues. So we're taking a very reasoned and balanced approach, but we are encouraging use of the office on a 2 to 3 days per week.
If employers are asking staff to return, they must make sure workplaces are safe. And at a time when infections are rising in some areas, trade unions have questioned the wisdom of encouraging people back to the office. Sarah Corker, BBC News in Leeds.
One of the world's biggest banks, HSBC, has reported a 65% drop in profits for the first half of this year. That is far larger than expected. The bank's facing a number of challenges, including the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. More than half its profits come from its operations in Hong Kong, where the bank has been criticised for supporting the territory's controversial new security law imposed by Beijing. The bank's boss says it plans to accelerate plans to cut 35,000 jobs worldwide. It's emerged that leaked papers on US-UK trade talks were stolen from the email account of the former International Trade Secretary Liam Fox. Last month, the government said that Russian hackers had tried to interfere in last year's general election in the UK by distributing illicitly acquired documents. The Cabinet Office will not comment on today's reports because a criminal investigation is underway. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake. Jonathan, do we know how serious the breach was?
Well, on the face of it, it is a serious breach. A dossier of documents being stolen from the email address of a government minister, an MP at the time, possibly a former government minister, depending on when the documents were stolen. And they were highly sensitive because if you cast your minds back to the depths of winter in the UK last year when the general election campaign was underway, one of the defining moments of that campaign was the Labour leader at the time, Jeremy Corbyn, brandishing this pile of documents at a press conference, claiming that it was proof that the government intended to, as Labour claimed, put the NHS up for sale and have it in scope as part of the discussions between the UK and the US at the time on a future trade deal post-Brexit. Now, the government dismissed those claims at the time and said that the NHS or access to it would not form part of any trade deal with the US in future. Since then, last month, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said that the government believed that Russian actors had tried to influence the outcome of the general election last year, with specific reference to what the government called the amplification of these documents online. Whether they were obtained by Russian actors or not, they were certainly, the government here believes, disseminated in the public domain by Russian actors. So now you have an investigation here in the UK underway, focusing, it's now apparent, on how these documents were stolen from the email address belonging to a Conservative MP and former International Trade Secretary.
Jonathan Blake, thanks so much. All this week, the BBC is looking at the impact of coronavirus on the tourism industry. In France, as the summer holiday season reaches its peak, some cities are introducing compulsory face masks for people outdoors. That follows a steep rise in cases in certain areas last week. Among the first to adopt the new measure is the coastal resort of La Rochelle, popular with British tourists, from where Lucy Williamson sent this report.
Holiday snaps from La Rochelle this summer come date-stamped with the year 2020. Every face in the city centre streets hidden behind a mask. It's been compulsory here since mid-July. Maud and Manon have been sent by the mayor's office to police the new rules.
Bonsoir. Excusez-nous, est-ce que vous avez des masques?
They don't take no for an answer.
C'est une zone où c'est obligatoire. Merci beaucoup.
In a nearby church, medics offer free tests for coronavirus without appointment. France has been recording more new cases each day than Spain, but La Rochelle has seen very few. Europe's COVID map is local, not national, with small, isolated clusters. Anne says one local official, that means national policies only go so far.
I think the French government, like any other government across the world, is groping in the dark, let's face it. So it's touch and go. Frankly, they are all doing their best, but there is no formula that one could follow.
Other cities in France are following La Rochelle's lead and imposing their own local restrictions to protect their residents, their visitors, and their local economy.
Uncertainty, including over quarantine measures, is being blamed for a big drop in British tourists to France. Britain is normally the #1 provider of international tourists here, and La Rochelle is one of their favourite destinations. But this year, their place is being taken by visitors from Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and lots of homegrown tourists from France.
There's still a scattering of British tourists here, though, including Jackie and Tim, who drove over from Bristol in their camper van.
Well, it's been amazing. We came over on the ferry, which was incredible. All safety was brilliant. Loads of gel, very few people on it.
We did have a cabin on the way over. When they gave us the door key, they even wiped it. They wiped the door handles before we entered. Everything was absolutely perfect.
La Rochelle is preparing for a second wave in this pandemic without ever really being hit by the first one. But with more than 140 active clusters in France, the risk of a wider spread is real. And predicting waves is no easy task, as any surfer knows. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, La Rochelle.
And do stay with us here on BBC News as we continue to look back on the life of John Hume, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who has died at the age of 83. In a few minutes' time, we'll be speaking to the journalist Peter Taylor. More on our website, bbc.com/news.
Hello there. It's going to turn hot again across Western Europe later this week. The more recent heat that we've seen in Europe, that is getting squeezed into easternmost areas as we see all this cloud coming in from the west, and that is dropping the temperatures. It's also dropping a lot of rain, as you can see here on Tuesday. To the west, after that rain, there is some sunshine around. We've still got the warmth in Iberia, and that's where the heat will build up from again later on in the week. For eastern areas of Europe, it's still dry and there's still some strong sunshine around for many on Tuesday. But we do have this zone of cloud with rain, heavy rain and thunderstorms affecting northern parts of Italy into Austria, Hungary, Slovenia as well as Croatia, and there'll be some further heavy rain pushing its way into Poland as well. Then after that, some sunshine. And we'll probably see more of that across Central Europe on Wednesday. That's because all that rain and thunderstorms will be moving southwards across Italy, further into the Balkans, perhaps arriving across northern parts of Greece. As those showers tend to ease off in Italy, so the warmth and the sunshine I think will return to Rome. But we've still got that high temperatures and all the heat in Spain, and that warmth will push its way up to France and into London, the peak of the heat probably on Friday. The temperatures are also set to rise later on in the week in Berlin as well as southern parts of Scandinavia, and it's still quite warm in Moscow.
This is the time to see systematic reform when it comes to the culture and behavior of policing in America.
There needs to be laws in place. There needs to be policies in place. We have to look at the whole structure and system around law enforcement and change it.
To get that message across that we were trying to create inclusion here and unity to make everybody feel as one and have a great time.
And very much tired of this happening over and over and over again in the Black community.
If my big brother would have seen everything like this going on right now, he preached it a lot.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
As a woman artist, as a Black artist, everything she has, everything she is, everything she's achieved, she had to ask for. Then made her.
Oh, this is direction.
We're going underground to see one of her works of art, a mosaic she designed in 1996. It's in the 125th Street subway station. Faith named the work after a song by Lionel Hampton that she often heard as a child, Flying Home. These world-famous heroes and heroines were at one time all living in Harlem, just like her.
The coronavirus pandemic has changed the world.
Including the way we work.
Right, so how are we going to do this?
Yes, as we learn remotely, digitally meet our friends and family.
And we're even broadcasting from home.
Take one for the trail.
Technology has been propelled into the limelight.
Bringing you the latest news, everything from tracing apps to online dating.
That's Click at our place. See you at yours this weekend on BBC World News.
This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. Tributes to John Hume, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who helped to end the Troubles in Northern Ireland. He's died at the age of 83. Spain's former King Juan Carlos leaves the country amid allegations of corruption against him. New 90-minute tests for coronavirus and flu are to be rolled out next week in hospitals in England. In Italy, Genoa's new bridge is officially reopened, replacing the one that collapsed 2 years ago. Well, hello again. Let's return to the news that the Nobel Peace Prize winner and prominent Northern Ireland politician John Hume has died at the age of 83. He was key to ending decades of violence in Northern Ireland, which killed thousands of people. Tributes have been paid by political leaders past and present, including the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who was in office when the peace deal was signed. I'm joined now by Peter Taylor, the journalist and documentary maker known for his coverage of the Troubles. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. You first met John Hume in 1972.
That's right. I met him about 2 days after Bloody Sunday, when 13 innocent civil rights marchers were shot dead by members of the parachute regiment. And I'd met John, I think, the day before and got to know him. And obviously, he's the kind of person with whom one has a sort of almost immediate rapport. And the following evening, there was a candlelit vigil that was making its way from the Bogside, where the shootings happened, up to the Cregan Church, St Mary's, where the 13 coffins were lying in state. And John said to me, Peter, if you really want to know and try to understand what's going on in this city and in Northern Ireland, he's the person you ought to talk to. And his name, John told me, is Martin McGuinness. And so my beginning of covering the so-called Troubles began at that stage. John Hume, and subsequently, a few days later, met Martin McGuinness. And both John Hume and Martin McGuinness were literally neighbours living a few hundred yards apart in the Bogside. But their approach to the solution of the problem, and in particular the long-term aim of both nationalists and Republicans of a united Ireland, could not have been more different. They were, a billion miles apart, because John Hume was utterly committed to a peaceful solution of the Irish problem. He wanted a united Ireland, but believed it could only happen on two conditions. One is that violence was put to one side, and secondly, that the IRA recognised that Unionists, Protestants, Loyalists would have to be part of it. On the other side, Martin McGuinness was committed to the so-called armed struggle, believing, certainly at that stage and through much of the 70s and 80s, was convinced, believed that the only way that united Ireland could be achieved was via the so-called armed struggle. John Hume's great ability and great legacy was that he was able to put together the various disparate pieces of the Northern Irish jigsaw. And he was able to do it because he was the kind of person that he was, because also he knew the IRA. He recognised what the IRA was, although he condemned in the strongest possible terms its methodology. He understood where the IRA was coming from and the support it had within the nationalist Catholic community. He was able to have a dialogue many years later, actually 20 years later, at the end of the 1980s with Gerry Adams, by which time the IRA had also recognised that if there was to be an end to the conflict, the IRA and Sinn Féin would also have to enter the political process. And John Hume encouraged the IRA, and Gerry Adams to go down that road. Secondly, he had really strong relations with the Dublin government. He knew many of their leaders, he knew many of their senior civil servants. And thirdly, he, of course, was a Westminster MP, and therefore he was plugged into Westminster and was able to convince the British that what they had to do, if they wanted the violence to stop, was to send signals to the IRA. And senior politicians like Peter Brook and Patrick Mayhew made public statements saying, which was basically John Hume's language, that Britain had no selfish strategic interest in Northern Ireland. And lastly, but also very importantly, John had first very close contacts in America, which was the money and the arms that had fueled the IRA's campaign. He had access to the White House, to Bill Clinton, people like Teddy Kennedy. And the White House and America's role was crucial because they were providing the sinews of war for the IRA, or some of them at least were. And America was really the guarantor of the release of prisoners that was the prerequisite of the Good Friday Agreement. So John was able to put these disparate pieces together with the result of the remarkable Good Friday Agreement. And also he finally convinced the IRA, although they began to realise that anyway, that if there was to be an end to violence and if there was to be a united Ireland,